Welcome to the Royal Collection podcast. I'm Rachel Salaman. Visitors to the staterooms at Buckingham Palace this summer have a double treat in store. The Duchess of Cambridge's wedding dress will be on display, along with the royal wedding cake. That's in addition to this year's special exhibition, Royal Fabergé, a display of over 100 masterpieces by Peter Carl Fabergé, the great Russian jeweller and goldsmith. In this podcast, I meet Caroline de Guitaut, the exhibition's curator, and we hear from the great-granddaughter of Peter Carl Fabergé, Tatiana Fabergé, who shares her unique insight.
I think in 1882 was the first time that the Imperial family bought something, cufflinks for the Tsar. After that, everybody, I've seen, yes, I want one like that.
Also in this podcast, the Royal Mews at Buckingham Palace, a fully functioning stables and the home of many of the carriages familiar to us from state occasions, like the recent royal wedding. Deputy Head Coachman Russell Adams shows me around.
Every monarch from George IV to the present day has been to their coronation in this carriage. I have heard it's very uncomfortable, very seasick-inducing, and in fact, Queen Victoria, after her coronation, swore she would never ride in it again, and she didn't.
But first, the Duchess of Cambridge's wedding dress. It was designed by Sarah Burton for Alexander McQueen, working closely with the Duchess, who was keen for the dress to reflect British craftsmanship at its finest. Caroline de Guitaut spent some time with the designer, finding out more about this beautiful garment.
In talking with Sarah Burton, who designed the dress, it was interesting to hear her describe the selection of fabric. And they chose to use this beautiful satin organza, or satin gazelle, as it's called, which on one side is this beautiful pale ivory colour, and actually they backed the fabric with a white satin gazelle. So it has this sort of double layer, and one plays off against the other, so you get a very lovely pale ivory effect.
Now, you mentioned the designer Sarah Burton for Alexander McQueen. What's the significance of that choice of designer?
Well, I think that, again, in conversation with Sarah Burton, it comes across very strongly the respect that the House of Alexander McQueen has for the tradition of craftsmanship in couture. I believe that this is something that very much appealed to the Duchess of Cambridge, that she wanted the dress to be an exponent of the best of British couture, the best that it could offer. And I think that's partly the reason why Alexander McQueen was chosen, but also the fact that there is a cutting-edge element to the design. So in a way it blends the best of tradition with the best of modernity, and I think the House of Alexander McQueen does that to perfection, really.
So what role did the Duchess play in the design?
Well, the Duchess of Cambridge was very involved in all aspects of the design, obviously working very closely with Sarah Burton, and she had views on the shape, on the colour, on the different elements that were incorporated, and I think she wanted the dress to show an emphasis for the importance of the British Isles, and so we see in the lace the emblems of Ireland, England, Scotland and Wales. So it has a very British feel to it. The lace really echoes the theme of the language of flowers, which was very important to the Duchess too, and we see that carried through not only the floral decoration of the wedding, if we think of the trees in the Abbey and the flowers and the bouquet and the messages that they all encapsulated, but also in the cake, of course, which was heavily decorated with flowers. So the Britishness, the language of flowers were all important elements that she wanted to incorporate in the dress, and so I think she was very, very involved indeed.
What design influences can be seen in the dress?
Well, I think there are a variety of influences that we see in the dress. I mean, clearly the nipped-in waist, the corset, the padded hip, and the bustle, which supports the pleats at the back of the top of the skirt and train, reference back to Victorian dress. This is something that we see repeatedly in the house style of McQueen, this idea of Victorian corsetry. But also in the detailing and the sheer attention to detail, there's also an echo of the sort of arts and crafts movement, and I think that again is something that is drawn out through the way the dress is put together. Yet it is a very modern dress. There's a modernity to the cut, the shape, the colour, the way that the lace is applied. It's not done in a traditional way in a sense, it's actually done with a modern flavour, so that there are lots of influences going on in there.
How was the dress created?
The creation of the dress is actually a very interesting point. One imagines a designer sitting down at a table with their pencils and sketching, but in actual fact, the creation was very much a three-dimensional process. The Duchess tried on several different shapes in order to work out what proportions would work, how the scale of the dress would work in the context of the occasion. So everything came about in a very three-dimensional way. Various toiles were made and tried and fitted and pinned and adjusted. Once the shape had been agreed, panels were cut, a pattern if you like, in tracing paper. The laces were selected. There are 6 different laces involved, and elements from the lace were taken and cut out, laid on the panels of the pattern. These panels were then copied, laid on the toile to make sure that the design worked, that everything was mirrored and perfectly engineered around the Duchess's body so that the bodice is beautifully fitted, everything matches, each panel is mirrored throughout the skirt. And then these patterns were sent to the Royal School of Needlework, where the team there were responsible for appliquing each individual cut lace element onto this silk tulle net. And those lengths were then sent back to Alexander McQueen and were applied onto the dress. And then they were cut around so that the silk tulle is actually cut away, exposing just the edges of the lace, so that we have a very naturalistic effect all the way around the lower half of the skirt at the front, on the bodice, and also on the train.
How do you think history will judge this dress? How does it fit among all the other royal wedding dresses?
I think the dress very much holds an important place in the tradition of royal wedding dresses because it blends tradition with modernity. It's very much a timeless piece. It combines the best of all the couture tradition alive in this country, all the wonderful skills, the craftsmanship, the lace, the applique, the involvement of the Royal School of Needlework, and yet that's blended with a modern fabric, a modern cut, a design from one of the leading designers in this country, and I think the dress will very much, for all those reasons, stand the test of time.
Visitors to the staterooms at Buckingham Palace will also get a chance to see part of one of the finest collections of Fabergé in the world, shaped by 6 successive generations of the British royal family. Most people associate the name Fabergé with the spectacular Imperial Easter eggs, but as this exhibition shows, the firm created a vast range of objects, from flower ornaments to cigarette cases to miniature household items. Caroline de Guitaut and I were joined by Tatiana Fabergé, great-granddaughter of Peter Carl, who told us how the House of Fabergé began.
Carl Fabergé's father was Gustave Fabergé, and he, as far as we know, went to St. Petersburg around 1830 and then opened his first store there, which was modest, and then little by little he enlarged it, and in 1846 his first son was born, Peter Carl, but everybody calls him Carl Fabergé.
In the 1880s, Peter Carl, now a master goldsmith, took over the running of the firm. It wasn't long before the exceptional quality of Fabergé craftsmanship caught the attention of the Tsar.
I think in 1882 was the first time that the Imperial family bought something, cufflinks for the Tsar. After that, everybody, I've seen, yes, I want one like that. So they already, at that time, had a workshop which was getting bigger, and he had a very good feeling for the people he chose as collaborators.
The British, Danish and Russian royal families had close family ties, and often exchanged works by Fabergé as personal gifts. This formed the foundation of the exceptional Royal Fabergé collection.
The Royal Collection contains something in the region of 800 or 900 pieces of Fabergé, over 100 of which will be on display in this particular exhibition. now that the Romanov family's collections, of course, no longer exist following the revolution when they were all broken up and sold off and so on, it's really the unsurpassed collection that's still in the same ownership of the same family. Close family relationships were very important to how this collection of Fabergé has come about. And of course, we have to remember at this time that Queen Alexandra and Marie Fyodorovna were two daughters of King Christian IX and Queen Louise of Denmark, and they married respectively Tsar Alexander III in the case of Marie Fyodorovna and King Edward VII in the case of Queen Alexandra. This close relationship continued on into the next generation because Queen Victoria's granddaughter, Alix of Hesse, married Tsar Nicholas II, who was the son of Tsar Alexander III. So there's a continuing interrelationship between the families, primarily between the Russian and the English royal families, but via the Danish connection. The objects on display are very closely related to the individual collectors. So among the tremendous range of pieces which were acquired by Queen Alexandra and Edward VII is a portrait model of Edward VII's favourite dog, who was called Caesar. And Caesar is one of the animals that was actually modelled from life. This is part of a commission that the king placed in 1907 to have portrait models made by Fabergé of many of the favourite dogs, horses and other animals kept on the estate at Sandringham in Norfolk. And so we end up with this marvellous sculpture on such a tiny scale. Not only is it beautifully carved and absolutely representative of the breed of dog, which was Caesar was a Norfolk Terrier, but it totally captures his personality. And in fact, in a very witty touch, the sculptors have added a collar which is in gold enamelled and with the letters "I belong to the king." So there's absolutely no doubt who Caesar is and how important he was.
When Fabergé got this order from the King Edward VII, he sent one of his best sculptors and modelers, Boris Ascalovich Freudmann Cluzel, and he was really a very fine artist. After the revolution, he ended up teaching also sculpture and design in Egypt, in Cairo.
In the 1930s, King George V and Queen Mary made the significant purchase of Imperial Easter eggs, originally made for Tsar Nicholas II to present to Tsarina Alexandra Fyodorovna. The one that we're looking at in particular today is known as the Colonnade Egg, and it was made for the Tsar to give to the Tsarina in 1910. It was that year's Easter egg. One was presented each year by the Tsar to his consort on Easter Day. And in this instance, the egg, in fact, performs the function of a clock. It's a rotary clock surmounted above a colonnade, which is made from bowenite, which is a pale green stone. The little figure who's seated at the top of the egg represents the Tsarevich Alexei, and the four female figures around the base represent the four daughters of the Tsar and the Tsarina. Inside the colonnade, we see a pair of platinum doves, and they represent the Tsar and the Tsarina. So there's a whole tale inside the egg, which really sums up the very personal nature of these exquisite objects. The final part of the exhibition will include a number of pieces owned by His Royal Highness the Prince of Wales, and they include a very humorous and very charming desk seal, which is in the form of a frog, a very realistic frog carved from nephrite. This seal, again, amongst the myriad of desk accoutrements that Fabergé produced, was actually given as a wedding present to the Prince of Wales in 1981.
What is nice, it's also sitting on a stand enameled in pink, which is a difficult color to obtain because the edge, if it's not well made, it turns yellow.
So why do you think that the interest and passion for Fabergé has continued to the present day?
I don't know, there's some kind of mystique around Fabergé.
I think that's correct. I think there is a kind of mystique around the pieces. I think that even people that know very little about the subject will recognise the name Fabergé and then perhaps think of the beautiful Imperial Easter eggs and how these objects are really very rare and so exquisitely made and so bound up with the tragic story of the end of the Romanov dynasty. And I think that's a completely irresistible combination of factors. I think when people go to the exhibitions, they can absorb all this information. They see frames with photographs of all the family members. And I think all of that adds up to a really special experience.
You can hear a longer version of that conversation on the Royal Fabergé microsite at www.royalcollection.org.uk. During the summer opening of Buckingham Palace, visitors have the opportunity to purchase a Royal Day Out ticket, which gives admission to all 3 sites at Buckingham Palace: the staterooms, the Queen's Gallery and the Royal Mews. The Royal Mews is the stables, the carriage house and the garage of the royal family. Horses are housed and trained here, and it's where the spectacular carriages used in state occasions are looked after. To find out more, I went to meet Deputy Head Coachman Russell Adams, who's worked at the Mews for nearly 20 years.
Every day we have to exercise the horses. They need to be going out in some form or other, either under saddle or in harness. And between these occasions, a lot of our time is taken up with training of young horses and new staff. We have many people who come here with a horse background and have usually ridden, but we have to teach them the carriage work from scratch.
And what does your job involve as Deputy Head Coachman?
Well, on a daily basis, I run my own, what we call a set. We have 3 sets in the Mews. Each set has 10 horses and 6 members of staff, so I'm responsible for one of those. I do have other duties. I'm in charge of procuring all the veterinary medicines that we need and supplements, and when the head coachman is off the yard, then I oversee everything in his place.
What kind of activity goes on here in the run-up to state occasions like the recent royal wedding?
We plan quite far in advance which horses we're going to use, which carriages, which combination of teams, postilions or drivers, depending on what the occasion is. And we will practice in-house up until the day itself. The week leading up to the procession, there is usually an early morning rehearsal, which involves us, the cavalry, the guards, and all the various other departments, police, ambulance service, everyone else who's involved. And we have a major practice before the actual day itself.
Well, let's go and look at some of the highlights now.
When the visitors arrive at the Royal Mews, they firstly get to see some of the horses, not all of them, because this is a working stable, so we only have a handful on show. There are a number of state carriages that they can come and see. There is also a car on display, plus the riding school, which is the oldest part of the Mews and was actually here before the Mews became the stables it is today.
Well, here we are in front of a few of the horses. Russell, tell us about these.
These are 3 bays that we have on site: Sydney, Melbourne and Bermuda. They're all fully fledged carriage horses. There are none here in training. They're all fully qualified, if you like. We start the horses training when they're 4 years old, when they're broken to saddle, and then by about 5 we start doing preliminary harness work with them and building up to their role as a ceremonial carriage horse, which can take anything from a year to 2 years, sometimes 3 years, depending on the temperament of the horse and how well they take to the training. During the summer season, they do work very hard. We have a lot of processions, Royal Ascot, trooping the colour, various other commitments as well. During the summer, they have a good long holiday, 6 to 8 weeks. They go out to grass and have a complete rest. Day to day, they do an hour to an hour and a half's work, except for Sundays, which is their day off.
Well, we're now standing in front of the 1902 State Landau, which people will recognise if they saw the royal wedding. Russell, tell us about this.
The 1902 State Landau was built for King Edward VII. He wanted a nice, smart carriage for his second day of his coronation. And although there are other Landaus in the Mews, he wanted something bigger and better. So he commissioned Hooper of Chelsea to build him this carriage.
And what was its role in the royal wedding?
In the royal wedding, it was used to carry the bride and groom away from Westminster Abbey to take them back to the palace. It was pulled by 4 horses, 4 grey horses, postilions. and it also is used regularly on state visits by Her Majesty and the visiting head of state.
Now, one of the most spectacular carriages housed at the Royal Mews is the Gold State Coach, and we're standing in front of it now. Russell, can you describe it first of all?
It was built in 1761, was first seen in public in 1762 for the state opening of Parliament. It weighs 4 tonnes, it's about 12 feet high to the crown at the top, and it's about 25 feet long. It's wood with gold leaf, with oil-painted panels on the side. It's very maritime features on there. There are waves, tritons, mermen, things like that. It was to represent the monarch being drawn through the seas in his ship of state.
What's it used for now?
Now it's used for coronations only. It has been used for various Jubilee processions, but otherwise it's coronations. And every monarch from George IV to the present day has been to their coronation in this carriage.
Do you know what it's like to ride inside it?
I have heard it's very uncomfortable, very seasick inducing, and in fact Queen Victoria, after her coronation, swore she would never ride in it again, and she didn't.
You've seen a lot of visitors come to the Royal Mews over the years. From their reactions and also your own experiences, what do you think makes it worth visiting?
There's always something going on. Not only will they see everything on display, if they're lucky enough, they'll see us driving carriages in and out of the yard, working the horses in the riding school. It's not just something to come and look at, it is a working yard. It's living history.
Deputy Head Coachman Russell Adams. The Royal Mews at Buckingham Palace is open to visitors for most of the year, and as I mentioned earlier, during the summer opening of Buckingham Palace, you can visit the staterooms, the Queen's Gallery and the Royal Mews with a special Royal Day Out ticket. The Duchess of Cambridge's wedding dress is on display in the staterooms at Buckingham Palace from the 23rd of July to the 3rd of October 2011, as is the special exhibition Royal Fabergé. You can buy tickets online, by phone and in person. Details are on the website www.royalcollection.org.uk. With all tickets bought directly from the Royal Collection, you can return free of charge for a year. On the day of your first visit, all you have to do is sign and print your name on the reverse of your ticket, ask a member of staff to stamp and validate the ticket, and then retain this ticket for future visits. Thanks for listening. Goodbye.